Hello everyone, Reza here with another step-by-step Unreal Engine tutorial. In this video, I'll demonstrate how to create a realistic pyro effect using Niagara system and multi-frame textures inside the application. You would be surprised how easy it is to bring astonishing effects from other 3D software packages into Unreal Engine. So without any further ado, let's get started. Alright, first things first, let's launch Unreal Engine. Let's create a project, Unreal Engine project, and create necessary folders. And then, only then, I'll get to the textures. So let's go into Film Template, create a blank one. I'm in the right category or right project location. I'm just going to call that SubUV, because that's what we're going to do after all. I would like to enable ray tracing, disable starter content. We don't need any starter content. And let's fire up Unreal Editor. All right, here I am inside Unreal Editor. Let's take care of the folder hierarchy. So I'm going to create one parent folder with my name and 3 subfolders inside it. One is going to hold Niagara. The other one is going to hold our material, which is a super simple material. And the third one is going to hold our multi-frame textures. So I'm just going to call that textures. Now we're good to go. Let's create our Niagara. So I'm going to right click Niagara system. And again, if you are unfamiliar with Niagara, I explained all the key attributes inside Niagara system in one of my Unreal Engine video series. Definitely check that out. It's about an hour long and I went through all the do's and don'ts you need to know about this system. So I'm going to go in here, create a new system, and I'm going to pick the simplest form of Niagara system, which is basically a blank template. I'm going to add an emitter to it and I'm going to go finish. Let's name it before we forget. So NS for Niagara system and flame, because that's what we're going to create today. If I double click, you can see I have my Niagara flame system and empty Niagara emitter. All right. We will get to that and add necessary modules to it, but for now, let's dock it right next to our main project so we can easily go back and forth. Let's do the same thing with our material. We need one material for our particle system. So I'm going to go with a simple material. I'm going to call that MM for master material underscore flame. We're not going to create any instance material for this one, bit of an overkill, so that should do the trick. Now I'm not going to create also any material for the ground because we are going to hide it. Speaking of which, let's remove some of the redundant elements in the scene, as we just need an effect at this stage. So I'm going to turn off the fog. I'm going to turn off the instance foliage, turn off the player start, sky, skylight, and reflection. All we need at this point is just one good directional light. I think at this point we are ready to move on to the next module where we talk about the main component of this tutorial, which is a multi-frame texture or texture sequence or flipbooks. There are so many terms for it, but let's see how I go about this and how I create that inside Embergen. Now, before I get into Embergen, there are many ways of creating multi-frame textures. You can create your pyro, render it in 3D Max, Maya, Blender, bring it into Nuke, and drop in a flipbook node and export it with a slightly higher resolution. You can use Houdini, create your pyro, and then bring your pyro into COPS, compositing platform inside Houdini, and export your multi-frame textures. What I'm using is Embergen, which to me is a very efficient application. In case if you don't know what Embergen is, it's a real-time fluid simulation tool for creating fire, smoke, explosion, so on and so forth. It's an incredibly powerful platform, and hopefully real soon I will put together a series on that. But for now, here's the scene that I'm working with. I don't need the ground. I don't need the skybox. All I need is the fire. I'm going to go and fix my camera. So I already have a camera in place to be able to render it. And for rendering, I'm rendering RGBA, bringing alpha, because you will see how important it is to have an alpha. So if you are using other software packages, make sure to include alpha into your multi-frame texture or frame sequence. And then I do a flip book out of it. Now I'm going to go super high res with this one, 8K, because I just want to get a good resolution. And I'm going to go 8:8 for columns and rows. This number is extremely important because we are going to reference that inside Niagara system. The rest is pretty self-explanatory. I specified the path, first frame, last frame, frame stride set to 1, so I'm not skipping any frame, and alpha blending mode set to straight alpha. And if I go to simulation inside time control, I'm actually looping the simulation as well. So if you can loop the simulation, that is even better. Now, I've exported this already, and let me show you what the final result is. So you can see 8x8 columns and rows, and because it's 8K, if I zoom in, you can see I'm getting a very decent result. Now, out of my own curiosity, I tried to push this to 16 by 16 with 2064 frames, and this is a 16K image, and you would be surprised how well Unreal Engine held up. So you can see, by the way, the order is left to right, top to bottom, and because it's a loop, you can see that the very first frame and the very last frame are identical. I guess if I bring the 8K image, 8x8, you can see that the first frame and the last frame are identical, which is going to help Unreal Engine just to effortlessly loop the simulation for you. I'm going to put both images into my Patreon on top of a few experiments that I did. That's another one, which is a candle flame that I did inside Ambergen. So you can see this one is also 8x8, 8K, and this is 16 by 16, and the resolution is 16K, and the resolution definitely holds up, and Unreal Engine was able to calculate this beautifully. The only reason I'm not covering 16K is because I have 4090 as my graphics card, and I'm not sure if any sort of mid-range graphic card can easily process that. So for the simplicity's sake, I'm going to go with that 8x8. Let's bring that into Unreal Engine and see how we can sort of benefit from it. So I'm going to go into textures, and I am going to navigate into my textures folder and bring in this flipbook flame. Instantly, it identifies that it's got alpha. So I've got R. If I go from the top, I've got R, G, and B, and alpha. So quite important to bring alpha. I know I've mentioned that before. Make sure not to forget that. Also sRGB ticked because it's a color map. All right, now with this, let's go into our material and connect this into our material. I'm going to enable. I'm going to open that. First things first, we need to change our blend mode. So I'm going to go from opaque into translucent. Obviously, all we need is emissive and opacity. And let's go ahead and select our texture and simply type in texture sample. Now the cool thing is when you select your texture and create a texture sample, Unreal Engine is smart enough to connect your texture to texture sample, but of course you can always go ahead and choose anything that you want. Now from here, it's fairly straightforward. RGB A, or RGB rather, goes to emissive, and alpha goes to opacity. Now there are many ways of sort of playing around with this super simple node. For example, if you would like to get a little bit of contrast, you can always create a power node, and I'm holding down control. You can put the power in the base. You can hold down one left click to bring a value and make that your texture and add whatever value you have in mind. So if you want to get something super oversaturated, you can bring the value set to 2, and you can see what I'm getting is very much saturated. I might actually change that to, let's say, a plane here, so we kind of get to see that. You can see this is a bit of an overkill, but you know, if that works for you, that's fine. I'm gonna go ahead and disable show background because we really don't need it at this stage. And I'm not too sure for this particular one if I need to intensify the colors, to be honest with you. So what I'm going to do is just to delete them and go straight from RGB to emission. But remember, that is always the case if you have something with slightly lower contrast. All right, I'm just going to save. And let's dive into Niagara, how to create an animation out of this image inside Niagara system. All right, I'm inside the Niagara system flame. By the way, it would be a good idea to save that as well. Don't forget. And well, we have nothing, simply because there is no particle that gets generated. We have a sprite renderer, which at the moment is set to the default shader. But first things first, let's go ahead and create a spawn rate. And this is something that we do inside Emitter update. So I'm just going to go ahead and type in spawn rate. And that allows us to generate a particle. So you can see number of particles per second. We don't need a good number of particles. All we need is one, believe it or not, and that gives us the particle or the amount of particle that we need. The next one is to go into sprite renderer and find the texture that we put together. So if I go into the material, we have to nominate the material, and it's called Flame. So let's go in here and just type in underscore, and you can see this material comes up. Now I should be able to see the texture as soon as I play. There you go. So we have one particle, and that one particle has got this texture. Now what I need to do next is to go to SubUV of the sprite render and say I've got 8 in U and 8 in V, just instead of using 1 to give me this amount of images, go 8 and 8 and give me 1 image instead. And that attribute is actually on the sprite renderer as well. So I'm just going to collapse sprite rendering, and I go into SubUV, and you can see in here it says sub image size, and basically this attribute says every time you use image, just let me know how many tiles you have, and whatever tile you have in mind, put those in here. Remember 8 for rows and columns that I showed you inside Ambergen? That's where you put those numbers. So I'm just going to go 8 with U, 8 with V, and it's going to collapse them all into one image. That's more like it. I feel like we're going somewhere with this. I'm going to turn off grid. All right, we're making great progress. Where's next? If I go and play, it is basically now one particle that we see and it doesn't have any animation to it. Now it's time to introduce probably the most important module in this section, and that is SubUV animation. So let's go to the next chapter and see how we can add that into our scene and get an animation out of this static image. So SubUV animation is under particle update. Remember that when we talked about the basics of Niagara, anything to do with emitter, we'll look into emitter, and anything to do with particles and how they move, we'll look into particles. Particles at creation would be particle spawn, and after creation behavior falls under particle update. And definitely the way that particle move is actually part of particle update. So I'm going to add a new module, and this one is called SubUV. And as soon as you bring SubUV, we've got only two. One is texture sample, the other one is animation, and that's exactly what we want. Now it gives us usually error as soon as and you can see that little warning in here, and it says, all right, you want me to apply it to what exactly? We want to apply it to our sprite renderer, because believe it or not, there are ways to apply this to different components. Now I'm going to go into setup, and in here in source, we need to specify the source because we have basically blank for source. All I need to do is just to click in here and go sprite renderer. And the reason it's asking for this is because you may have more than one emitter inside a system. Once you get that out of the way, then if I play, you can see we are getting something, but it feels like it's the function or the operation is somewhat additive. So it feels like it's a loop, and there's an image on top of it again, and there's another image on top of it. So it's not really working properly for us. Now, the reason that you feel like it's the operation is actually additive is because of the lifespan of the particle. Well, hopefully you remember where the lifespan resides inside our emitter. It's under initialize particle. Right now, the lifetime is set to 5. We need to make that set to 1. I'm just going to zoom out ever so slightly. And you can see our flame comes to life. Beautiful. Let's save that and bring it to our scene. I'm going to go to content drawer. I'm going to go to Niagara. I can actually hide this. I'm going to go to Niagara and bring our Niagara system in. All right, we're almost there. If I zoom in, you can see the gizmo kind of obscuring the FX, and the FX is kind of tiny. So why don't I go to Niagara system, and if I scroll down, there is sprite attribute sprite size mode, and there is no set attribute for that sprite size. So I'm going to go from unset to uniform, and I'm gonna choose 200, which I think would be a good size for this environment. Obviously this can be changed, and it's sort of scene independent because it's reading it from a texture, and that's the beauty of it. You don't need to be mindful of the scene scale, just like volumes. You can just scale it however you want to. I'm just going to save, and if I go to the scene, you can see our flame appears. If you want to get rid of the gizmo, it's just a matter of pressing G on the keyboard, and it goes to game mode, and there you have it. You can see the quality is fantastic, and this is just with 8x8 multi-frame texture. Just imagine if you bump it to 16K and feed that more information, you get even a better result. So you can see how easy that is to bring a texture and benefit from it. The cool thing about that is no matter how drastic I turn the camera, this plane is like aim constrained to the camera, and there's no way that the viewer realizes about the trick that it's actually a texture, not a volume effects. So I personally love this trick and use it a lot in my projects. You can bring, for example, I've created a candle flame as well. You can see how beautiful this candle flame is working for me. I showed you the images early in the tutorial. So it's absolutely fantastic the way you can bring your images and turn them into effects using Niagara and SubUV modules in Unreal Engine. I hope you found this video useful and use these techniques in your projects. Let me know how you go in the comments below, and until the next video, see you guys later.